Welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be tackling a question that might seem a little controversial, maybe a little counterintuitive at first.
Oh,
Is life actually better today,
uh,
which was in the past?
interesting.
Yeah, and we're going to be exploring this idea based on the work of Steven Pinker,
Okay,
who you might have heard of. He's a psychology professor at Harvard,
right.
and known for really taking this data-driven approach to understanding human progress.
I see. Well, he argues, and I think pretty convincingly, that despite all the doom and gloom that we're always hearing about, the world is actually less violent now than it's ever been.
Yeah, that was something that I found really interesting. It's not, when we talk about violence, I think maybe like our first instinct is to think about war and, things like that.
Right.
But he really looks at kind of,
All forms of violence, from,
yeah.
homicide rates to child abuse.
Yeah, all these different metrics that we'll get into. But I think it's interesting that that's kind of his like jumping off point. And then in his most recent book, Enlightenment Now, he really kind of goes even further with this optimistic view.
Yeah,
And he uses 15 different metrics to actually measure progress across, all these different aspects of human life.
right.
Which I think for a lot of people listening right now, they might think, well, how could that possibly be true? Because we're so bombarded with like all the negativity in the news cycle and things like that.
Sure, it's counterintuitive.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you look at the data,
The data is pretty
it's
fascinating.
pretty compelling.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so intriguing to actually deep dive into this. But
Yeah, and he uses all sorts of sources and statistics to
Mhm.
really build his case. For example, he points to the dramatic decrease
Okay,
in deaths from lightning strikes.
lightning strikes, yeah.
So back in the early 1900s, you were actually 37 times more likely to be killed by lightning than you are today.
37 times. That's a huge difference.
Huge.
What is behind that decrease? Is it just like a stroke of luck, or are there actual things that we've done that have
I mean, it's not just luck. Tinker attributes it to a number of advancements, better weather prediction,
Okay.
safety education,
Uh-huh.
and even the shift toward urbanization. More people living in cities means fewer people are out in open fields
Right,
when
yeah.
there's a thunderstorm.
So it's like even just where we live can actually
Impact our safety.
yeah, impact our safety in ways that we don't even really realize. Are there other examples that he points to, like things in our everyday lives that are actually better, that we maybe don't realize?
Absolutely. One that I find really, really interesting is the impact of the washing machine.
Yeah, I remember that in the materials.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
So the invention of the washing machine
Her.
has freed up just an enormous amount of time for people,
Ah,
especially women.
okay.
Back in 1920, people were spending like 10 hours more
Wow.
per week doing laundry than we do today. That's half a day, like every week.
That's a lot of time to like dedicate to other
Yeah,
things,
yeah,
whether it's, furthering your education or pursuing a hobby or just like relaxing.
exactly.
It makes you wonder how much our lives have been like transformed by, these seemingly
Mundane.
yeah, mundane inventions like the washing machine.
It's a perfect example of how technological advancements can really have this ripple effect on our lives.
Yeah.
Freeing up time and energy for other pursuits. And then, this theme of technological advancement leading to improvements in well-being.
Right.
It continues when you look at the data on workplace safety.
Yeah, and that was really surprising to me. I didn't realize that workplace deaths
Yeah.
have actually decreased so significantly since 1929. And that's despite the fact that, our population has grown.
Magically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, the workforce is also obviously
Yeah.
much larger.
And Pinker really attributes that to stricter safety regulations, improvements in engineering, and just a growing awareness of the importance of worker safety. We've learned to design and build things in ways that minimize risk
Right.
and prioritize human life.
Yeah.
And that's a major step forward.
Yeah, absolutely. What about he also talks about the rise in global IQ scores,
Oh, yeah.
which seems counterintuitive, right? Like
Yeah.
we often hear that technology is making us dumber,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but the data shows
It
otherwise.
does. It does. Global IQ scores are rising by an average of 3 points per decade.
3 points a decade. Like what is driving that? Is it just that like education systems are getting better, or is there something else going on?
Well, there are a number of theories about this.
Okay.
Better nutrition, a cleaner environment, these are likely contributing factors.
Uh-huh.
Pinker also suggests that the demands of modern life actually require us to engage in more analytical thinking,
I can see that. I mean, we are like constantly navigating,
complex
yeah,
systems.
these complex systems, whether it's public transportation or like technology interfaces or just even the amount of information that we're like taking in
Yeah.
on a daily basis.
Think about using a smartphone.
Right.
I mean, that requires a certain level of problem solving
Right.
and abstract thinking that um, previous generations just might not have encountered as frequently.
Yeah, it's almost like our brains are getting a workout just from like living in the modern
Yeah.
world. This brings us to kind of another area where he highlights progress that again might seem surprising,
Okay.
and that's the legality of war.
Okay.
Now, wait a minute.
Yeah.
War is illegal.
Well,
How is that even possible?
it's a good question.
There are conflicts happening all over the world right now.
Right, conflicts still exist,
Yeah.
but the establishment of the United Nations in 1945 created a framework for international law
Okay.
that essentially outlaws war
Hmm.
between nations.
So while there will always be exceptions,
Yeah.
the very concept of war has actually been delegitimized.
On a global scale.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, there are still conflicts and violence,
Right.
but Pinker argues that the overall trend is toward less interstate warfare.
Okay.
And now we have international sanctions and interventions that can be used to deter nations from engaging in full-blown war.
It's interesting to think about like the long-term impact
Yeah.
of these international organizations and legal frameworks because when you're just looking at the news and you see what's happening in this part of the world, what's happening in that part of the world, it can feel like things are just like never gonna.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in those headlines.
Yeah. Totally, totally. Yeah, lose sight of that bigger picture.
Absolutely. Progress isn't always linear,
Right.
and there will be setbacks along the way.
Uh-huh.
But when you look at the data over a long period of time, you often reveal these trends that we might otherwise miss.
That's a great point. So let's talk about life expectancy, for example.
Yeah.
It's really increased dramatically over the past few centuries.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically doubled since 1700,
Wow.
going from an average of about 35 years to 70 years today.
I mean, that's incredible
Yeah.
when you think about it.
It's not just that people are living longer.
Right.
It's also a reflection of the fact that fewer people are dying prematurely.
Right. Okay.
Maternal mortality, the rate of women dying during childbirth, that's dropped tenfold since the 1700s.
Oh, wow. It's easy to forget how
Yeah.
dangerous childbirth used to be.
Yeah.
What other factors are there that have contributed to that?
Well, advancements in medicine, sanitation, nutrition, all of these have played a role.
Right.
The development of antibiotics like penicillin that saved countless lives.
Yeah, and also the decrease in deaths from famine.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, I was reading that in the 1870s,
Yeah.
over 140 people out of every 100,000 died due to famine.
Right.
And today that number is less than 5.
Wow, that's incredible. That's really a testament to, advancements in agriculture, food distribution systems,
Uh-huh.
disaster relief efforts.
It's really powerful to think about like what we can actually accomplish
Yeah.
when we use our human ingenuity and actually collaborate with each other. So okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we have.
From lightning strikes to laundry to life expectancy.
To war.
And it does seem like Pinker's painting a pretty optimistic picture of
Yeah.
human progress.
Yeah.
But, let's be real, there are still millions of people living in poverty and suffering in the world today.
Right.
Is he just ignoring that reality?
That's a great question. And it's something that Pinker acknowledges directly in his work.
Okay.
He doesn't shy away from the fact that suffering still exists.
Uh-huh.
He even uses the Buddhist concept of dukkha.
Okay.
Uh,
Which is,
the idea that suffering is an inherent part of existence,
right, yeah.
to acknowledge this reality.
So how do we reconcile these two seemingly contradictory ideas? Because on the one hand, we've got all this data that's
Right.
pointing towards progress, but, you can't deny that there's still a lot of suffering
Right.
happening in the world.
And this is where things get really interesting. And this is one of the key takeaways from Pinker's work.
Okay.
There's this significant gap between actual progress and how people perceive the world.
So you're saying, like, our perceptions
Right.
might not always match up with reality.
Exactly.
Okay.
Pinker argues that we have what's called a negativity bias,
Uh-huh.
meaning that we're wired to focus on the negative,
Okay.
to anticipate threats and problems.
Okay, so that was like helpful for survival, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day, but maybe not so helpful now.
Not as helpful now. It can really distort our view of the world, make us think that things are worse than they actually are.
I can see that. I mean, when you think about like what we're exposed to every day,
Yeah.
I mean, the news is by its very nature is going to focus on like
The negative.
yeah, the negative. So it's really easy to fall into that trap of thinking that everything's getting worse.
And Pinker, he quotes Bill Gates, actually,
Oh,
who's a big proponent of his work, as saying that, the most stunning thing is the gap between actual improvement and this common view that the past was better and the future will be worse.
yeah. Yeah, I'm starting to see that. So it's not about denying that the problems exist.
No, not at all.
Right.
No.
But it's more about like challenging our assumptions
Challenging our assumption.
and really looking at the data. Okay, so where does the Metaperson project fit into all this? Because that was a
Yeah.
part of the research that I found super fascinating,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure that I fully grasp like how it.
Connects to Pinker's ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great point, and it's a perfect segue into the
Okay.
next part of our deep dive, the Metaperson Project. It offers this really unique perspective on the human experience, and when we combined its insights with Pinker's arguments,
Mm-hmm.
it really paints this compelling picture
Okay, I'm in teach.
of what it means to be alive today.
Let's dive into that. So you mentioned that the Metaperson project offers kind of a unique perspective on the human experience. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What exactly is this project all about?
So the Metaperson Project, it's essentially an attempt to quantify the human experience using data.
Okay.
It takes everyday life events, everything from the mundane to the extraordinary, and breaks them down into numbers.
Right. Like I remember reading about some of those numbers. Like the average person spends 25 years of their life sleeping.
It's true.
That's almost a third of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And we consume over 27,000 breakfasts in a lifetime, spend around 6 months urinating.
And what about all the little things too that we do without even thinking about it? Like touching our faces 80 million times,
Oh, yeah.
blinking 500 million times,
500 million. It's crazy.
and yawning like over 164,000 times.
It's true. It's easy to take these everyday experiences for granted, but when you add them all up, it really paints a remarkable picture
Yeah.
of the sheer volume of activity our bodies go through in a lifetime.
I see. You see what you mean about a unique perspective. It's like zooming out and seeing our lives from this like totally different angle. But how does this connect to Pinker's ideas about progress?
Well, it highlights the sheer improbability of being alive in the first place. I mean, think about it. The chances of you being born with your specific genetic makeup at this particular point in history,
Right.
I mean, those odds are astronomically small.
Yeah, like winning the lottery, but like on a cosmic scale.
Exactly, like winning the lottery. One source I came across even compares it to winning a lottery with odds of 1 in 102,685,000.
Wow, that's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It really makes you appreciate just being alive, right?
Yeah, we often focus on what we don't have.
Right.
But when you think about the sheer improbability of even existing, it makes you appreciate the present moment so much more.
That's a good point. And this brings us to another important point that Pinker emphasizes, and that's the power of comparative analysis and perspective.
Right, right.
So how did those concepts tie into what we're talking about with progress and well-being?
Well, we're constantly comparing ourselves to others.
Right.
And this often leads to feelings of inadequacy or dissatisfaction.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a natural human tendency, but it can be so detrimental to our well-being.
I know that feeling all too well. It's like when you're a kid and you're perfectly happy with your shoes until you see your friend's like shiny new pair.
Exactly. Or think about those classic guilt trips, right?
Oh, yeah.
There were starving children in India.
Right, right.
While, they may be well-intentioned, those comparisons can sometimes miss the mark.
Right.
It's important to acknowledge the suffering of others,
Yeah.
but constantly comparing ourselves to those less fortunate can lead to this distorted view of our own lives.
So how do we like break free from these comparison trap and actually develop a healthier perspective?
Well, I think it starts with widening our perspective and considering the bigger picture.
Okay.
Did you know that if you're earning $40,000 a year,
Yeah.
that puts you in the top 1% of earners
Seriously.
globally?
Wow. I had no idea.
Yeah,
That's kind of amazing.
it is.
It's also like a little bit humbling.
It is, isn't it? Our perception of wealth is often so skewed
Right.
by our immediate surroundings. We tend to compare ourselves to those in our social circles, our neighborhoods, rather than considering the broader global context.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in that like keeping up with the Joneses mentality and lose sight of like how well off we actually are compared to most of the world.
Yeah, widening our perspective can really shift our understanding of how well off we are
Yeah.
and what we should truly value. It's a powerful reminder to appreciate what we have,
Uh-huh.
even if it doesn't always feel like enough.
So are you saying that we should like just ignore the very real problems in the world and just like focus on feeling grateful?
No, no, not at all. Acknowledging progress, it doesn't mean turning a blind eye to suffering or becoming complacent.
Right.
It's about recognizing that both can exist simultaneously.
Okay.
We can strive to make the world a better place while also appreciating the positive strides that have been made
Right.
and recognizing our own privilege.
I see. So it's about like finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Between realistic optimism
Yes.
and taking action. Like we can acknowledge the problems that exist, but we can also celebrate the wins
Yeah.
and keep working towards solutions. So how do these ideas about progress and perspective like actually play out in our everyday lives? Can I give me like some specific examples of how our perceptions might be like skewed?
Well, think about modern conveniences that we take for granted, like refillable drinks at a restaurant
Okay.
or a self-serve ice cream machine. I mean, those were unimaginable luxuries of the past,
Oh, I love a good self-serve ice cream machine.
right? Endless possibilities. And I remember you were sharing that story about, I think it was Sister Susan, the nun,
Yeah, Sister Susan.
who described heaven as a place with unlimited Cokes and ice cream.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's funny, right?
Yeah,
Because something that seemed so fantastical back then
right.
is now reality at any McDonald's.
It's so true.
Yeah,
And it really shows you how much our desires and expectations really evolve over time. Like what once seemed like this like extravagant dream
right.
is now just like a normal everyday experience.
It's normal. It's not to say that we shouldn't aspire for more
Right.
or strive for continuous improvement, but it highlights how much our baseline of normal has actually shifted.
Yeah, it's like we're living in this future that past generations could only dream of.
It's true.
And yet so often we focus on what we don't have
Right.
rather than appreciating how far we've come.
It's a reminder to pause, to consider the context of our lives, appreciate the abundance that surrounds us,
Yeah.
even in the midst of the challenges.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really starting to see how all of these ideas like progress, perspective, and even like the seemingly mundane details of our daily lives are all like interconnected.
They are. They are.
And it's easy to get caught up in that like day-to-day grind
Inertia.
and kind of lose sight of the bigger picture.
It's a common human experience. We're wired to focus on the negative, right? To anticipate those threats, the problems.
Right, right.
But as we've discussed, this negativity bias can sometimes really cloud our judgment and prevent us from seeing the good
yeah.
that exists both in the world around us and in our own lives.
So if we're wired for this negativity, how do we actually like shift our perspective
Good question.
and cultivate a more balanced view of the world? Is it even possible to like rewire our brains?
That's a great question, and it's something we're going to explore further in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've talked about the evidence for progress, we've talked about the importance of perspective, and even the sheer improbability of like even being alive.
Right.
But as you mentioned, we're wired for negativity.
Yeah,
It can be really tough to shift that mindset.
it is. It's definitely a challenge, but it's not impossible.
Okay.
Think of it like building a muscle. The more we practice gratitude, the more we focus on the positive aspects of our lives and the world around us,
Uh-huh.
the stronger that positivity muscle becomes.
Okay. Okay, that's a helpful analogy. So instead of trying to like ignore or suppress like negative thoughts, we can try to counterbalance them
Yeah,
with positive ones.
exactly. It's not about denying the existence of problems
Right.
or pretending that everything is perfect.
Right.
It's about consciously choosing to focus on the good, to appreciate the progress that's been made, and to find those glimmers of hope even in challenging times.
So it's about like finding that sweet spot between like realistic optimism and constructive action.
Right.
We can acknowledge the problems that exist, but we can also celebrate the wins
Yeah.
and keep working towards solutions.
Exactly, exactly. And remember, progress, it isn't always linear.
Right.
There will be setbacks, there will be challenges along the way.
Uh-huh.
But if we zoom out, if we look at the bigger picture, the data really does suggest a trend toward improvement
Yeah.
in many areas of life.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
I feel like I'm looking at the world through like a new lens now.
That's the power of perspective.
Yeah.
And remember, it's not just about, global trends or abstract data.
Uh-huh.
It's about how we view our own personal experiences as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. So as we wrap up, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listener with?
Well, I'd encourage you to reflect on your own life and experiences. Is there a golden age you long for that might not have been so golden after all?
Hmm.
Are there areas where you've experienced personal progress
Right.
that you might have overlooked? Take a moment to appreciate how far you've come and consider how your own experiences um, align with or challenge this idea of overall progress.
I love that. It's a call to action, but also a reminder to like be mindful of our own narratives
Yeah, absolutely.
and how we're telling those stories. And hey, if this deep dive sparked any thoughts or personal stories for you, we'd love to hear them. Head
Yes.
over to our social media page and share your reflections. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep those perspectives shifting.